Yeah, that's what they said.
It was cold a little while ago, now it's warm.
Get my ideas, put water in the canal.
19.
19?
Yeah.
That looked like
Well, they put a little up there in the bay.
the main canal has some work.
Yeah, just to fill the bay. Yeah.
All right, we got a lot to cover today, so we're gonna get going. Time being 1:31. I'll call the March 12th, 2025 STRGBA GSA meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Jennifer here now. Hoping she can hear me, or she's gonna tell me that she can't on her phone here. Okay, so start off by making sure we got a quorum here. So on the far end there, we've got Mike Pitcock from City of Waterford. Next to him, Jeff Roberts. Welcome, Jeff, from the City of Oakdale. We got Darren Smallin from the City of Riverbank. Paul Pichel from MID. Kirsty McKinnon from Stanislaus County. And to my right, Timothy Barahona from City of Modesto. And I am Eric Thorburn from the Oakdale Irrigation District. We have a quorum. Moving right on to business from the public. So item number 2. Welcome. So at this time, anyone interested is welcome to introduce any topic within the GSA's jurisdiction. Matters presented under this heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the GSA at this meeting. It's not required, but speakers may provide their name and address. Public comments will be limited to 5 minutes per speaker.
One Crazy Oakdale. I wanted to find out if the 2024 fall well water analysis results have been released.
They've been, so 2024 fall, they have been collected. They will not be part of this report today, the annual report, but we do plan on doing a presentation on those soon. So maybe next month. Yeah. But in the annual report, we'll talk about the 2 prior to that. I have a hand raised on the phone. Jared? Oh, the hand went away. All right. Any other business from public? Anything that's not on the agenda? Who wants to bring up? No.
I do look, but I'm assuming I'm going to say something.
Yep.
That's not
Sure.
So Sean Roddy Hennings Brothers Drilling Company, member of the CGA, California Groundwater Association. So we just had a meeting of the legislature last week, and I asked some very specific questions in relationship to the GSA and statements that have been made to me about the threshold numbers. And I understand we've had an approved plan at the state. They've approved our plan. Obviously, we have a mitigation program that we're working on here to address that additionally. But under the plan, I have a few questions. Specifically, who created the threshold number? You know, where was that threshold number created? Why? And the reason why I asked that is because I was told by a gentleman from the Department of Water Resources that we met with, because I asked him, I said, well, you know, if we have a 5-foot threshold used directly from the DWR, and said, how would drought impact, and you know, so we talked about all of that, and he said, I don't know where you came up with the 5-foot threshold number. And I'm like, well, my GSA says that the 5-foot threshold number was created by DWR, or so we've had discussions about. Okay, so I said, all right, I apologize if I've got giving erroneous information here, then you know, but I want to know who created the 5-foot threshold. Why was a 5-foot threshold created? And who created that 5-foot threshold? If DWR, a direct person that's connected to DWR, said that they didn't mandate a 5-foot threshold. So that's just a very big question that I have as a member of this group and as as a person in the GSA and a part of the California Groundwater Association, meeting with the legislature and talking to these people and specifically asking these questions. I don't know where the hell we're going, because a 5 foot threshold is a big deal. It's very easy to meet a 5 foot threshold in the drought, in a time of drought, to then all of a sudden turn around and start restricting groundwater pumping as part of this organization or this group trying to figure out what we're going to do. So, and again, my experience in water well drilling says that in the last 50 years, going back to my data as a water well driller, from the 70s drought, on an average, we've dropped less than 50 feet in 50 years. Generally speaking, from that last drought in the 70s. And again, it changes in different places, obviously, but as an average, since we model everything to one freaking, one specific elevation, there's no logic in that we would use a 5 foot threshold for that particular thing. So was it that we submitted information previously and we got denied, from what I've understood from Christy here, that we initially went in and we submitted something and it turned around and it got sent back to us and we had to resubmit it to get approvals. So was that part of it, that we submitted a 10 foot threshold or a 15 foot threshold? And then we came back and then they said, no, that's not good enough. And then we went to a 5 foot threshold. These are the information that I want to know, because I have a question on the decisions that are being made on our behalf in the GSA that may or may not be required. And again, if the state of California is the one that's coming down with this, and they're the one mandating it, then they're lying to us as a California Groundwater Association and everything else. And you guys are saying that no, they're mandating the 5 foot. So I needed more clarity on that, because I think that has a direct correlation to what's happening here and our decisions on the mitigation program. If we're stuck to this 5 foot, and was it the proper decision? Was it the proper question of, is that the right number? And if we have to work off of that, then it's gonna directly affect all the decisions from this point forward in this group. So thank you.
Thanks. Some clarity on that will probably be provided during the annual report today. So if you have more questions after that, we can talk offline, but okay.
Hi, Louis Burkett. So my question might be jumping ahead a little bit, but I'd rather ask it now than ask it at the wrong time. It was kind of pertaining to Todd Groundwater's model, and I was just wondering if their model, because we're talking about demand management action a lot these days. I was wondering if their model incorporates some of the projects to their full potential that were in the GSP, like MID's GRP and OID's 10-year, and then to what extent do those projects stop? Like, so for instance, if cities hooked on to clean treated surface water and utilize that, is that in the model? Or, so those are just some of my questions. I don't know. Just let me know, or if it's going to be answered at a later point.
Yeah, we got the consultants online. So again, during the annual report, they might be able to provide a little bit of feedback on that.
Sure.
They're not prepared to answer that specific question today, but I think they've got some pretty good background and might be able to touch on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I turn this off?
It's okay. It's okay. Appreciate it. Anybody else? All right. Item number 3 is the approval of the December 18th, 2024 meeting minutes. Assuming everybody's had a chance to take a look at those. Are there any comments or questions from the member agencies on the minutes? Okay, I'll open it up to the public. Meeting minutes from December 18th. Seeing none, hearing no, I will entertain a motion.
A motion for approval. Second one. Assume I can't, even though this is my first meeting.
You may, yes. All right, we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 4, elected 2025 STRGBA GSA chairman and vice chairman. So according to our MOU, the first meeting of the calendar year, the chair and the vice chair are elected. So I'll entertain discussion and then ultimately motion from this committee.
I thought you've done a great job as chair. I'm continuing that as a recommendation to the rest of the board. I'm not sure who the vice chair is.
It was Jesse, so you basically stepped into that.
Yes.
But so we don't have a vice chair right now because we just started this new year, which is another timing wise it worked well.
I think it'd be great to have him ID as vice chair if we want to continue with you as chair. That's all I need. This is my thoughts. I don't know how
Thanks.
anyone else feels. Agree. I agree.
Okay, so is that a
I'll make
formal
it a
motion? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Honored to serve again for a year, and hopefully we're going to make some significant progress this year. So, any other comments from the member agencies? No? We'll open it up to public comment then. Going once? Going twice? Okay, we'll move on. Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, topic 5. This is the heart of the meeting, I should say. The 2024 water year annual report presentation and schedule. So we have our consultant on the line, and so both Todd Groundwater and Woodard and Curran are going to lead this conversation and this presentation.
Hi, Eric. Thank you. I will share my screen.
I'll add that if you haven't seen the agenda, there was a second version of the agenda that was added that had all of the slides on there. So if you didn't have that available, it is online. It's not in the link, but it's online. If you pull up the meeting agenda online, those slides are available.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Can you see and hear me pretty clearly?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Liz Elliott with Todd Groundwater, and we have a couple different presentations today to show you the results, the draft results of this year's annual report for water year 2024. Before I jump in, I just wanted to say congratulations to the GSA on getting an approved GSP. That was really, really good news that we got from DWR at the end of last month. So there's going to be 2 different presentations. This first one, I'm going to be sharing with my colleague Arden. We're going to be talking about different draft results that are in the annual report. And then I'm going to hand it over to Dominic and his team at Woodard and Curran, and he'll be talking about the model update and water budget. So the draft results that we are going to talk about are kind of a summary of the groundwater levels. We're not going to go into a lot of detail because we've presented the detail at previous meetings and don't want to repeat that because there is going to be a lot of information discussed today. We're going to also discuss the water quality analysis that's in the report, the reported dry wells for water year 2024, the subsidence analysis, and kind of summarize the progress that the subbasin has made towards sustainability. Just to start out, kind of a summary on the groundwater level analysis in water year 2024. So our the GSP monitoring network is composed of 59 representative monitoring wells. This set of wells is sampled twice a year, in the fall and in the spring. And so the two sampling events that are part of this water year are fall 2023 and spring 2024. Using the water levels that were measured during these two events, we've done an analysis of the sustainable management criteria. We've developed groundwater elevation contour maps, developed hydrographs, which document the trends in water levels over time. And the good news is that most of the wells, water levels in the fall of 2023 and spring 2024 are higher than in the fall of 2022. So I'm going to remind you of the definition of undesirable results that is in our revised GSP as well as the original GSP. For chronic lowering of groundwater levels, an undesirable result will occur when at least 33% of representative monitoring wells exceed the MT for a principal aquifer in 3 consecutive fall monitoring events. For interconnected surface water, an undesirable result will occur on one of the rivers when between 33% to 50%, depending on the river, of the representative monitoring wells for that river exceed the MT in 3 consecutive fall events. It's 33% on the Stanislaus and Tuolumne rivers and 50% on the San Joaquin. So here's a summary of where we were at in water year 2024 with respect to minimum thresholds. So this table summarizes for each principal aquifer, the western upper principal aquifer above the Corcoran clay, the western lower principal aquifer below the Corcoran clay, as well as the eastern principal aquifer, which is outside of the Corcoran clay extent, what the MT exceedances were in each of the aquifers in both the fall 2023 and spring 2024. And I've highlighted the percentages in green because in each one of these events during both seasons, we are below that 33% threshold, which is good news. For our interconnected surface water monitoring network, we have similar results. We are below that threshold along each of the rivers in both fall 23 and spring 24. So we didn't have any MT exceedances along the San Joaquin. We had 2 along the Stanislaus and 1 along the Tuolumne. So again, we're below that threshold that counts towards undesirable results. And this is a new table that we've included in this year's annual report because we wanted to summarize kind of where we're at with our GSP monitoring events. So this table summarizes the 5 GSP monitoring events through water year 2024 since the GSP was submitted to DWR back in January 2022. And I've highlighted only the fall events here because those are the events again that count towards undesirable results. So in fall 2022, we were above that 33% or 50% threshold in the eastern principal aquifer and as well as each of the 3 rivers. So according to our definition of undesirable results, that would have been the first of 3 events that count towards undesirable results, consecutive events. But in water year 2024 in the fall, we were below that 33% threshold on each aquifer and below the either 33% or 50% threshold along the rivers. And so we've in essence kind of reset that count towards undesirable results. So we do not now have any consecutive events that are counting towards undesirable results. So this was good news. But that doesn't give you the entire picture of what's happening in the subbasin. As you are all very well aware, we have declining water levels in the eastern part of the subbasin. So this map shows the fall 2023, it's kind of summary of MT exceedances. So this is for the eastern principal aquifer, and the green dots are wells where the water level was above the MT, and the red dots are below the MT. So where the red dots are where the MT was exceeded. And you can see just based on the coloring on this map that most of the red dots are in the eastern part of the eastern principal aquifer, eastern part of the subbasin, because we know that this is the area of the subbasin where water levels continue to decline. So even though in this event we are below that 33% threshold, here we are just below with 30% of the RMWs below the MT. So even though we're below that threshold and we're not counting towards undesirable results, what this map is showing and what we know as a subbasin is that the groundwater levels in the eastern part of the subbasin are continued to be problematic, which is why we are focusing so much effort on projects and management actions in this part of the subbasin. This also makes that similar point. This is a map showing hydrographs throughout the subbasin. During water year 2024, we did see some recovery in many of the wells, and you can see that especially in wells in the western part of the subbasin. In general and historically, wells in the western part of the subbasin have been relatively stable. And as you move east, we have got more decline and more fluctuation. And moving to the easternmost part of the subbasin, these two wells, Furtado and Paulsell 2, you can see from the hydrographs that groundwater levels continue to decline in these areas. So this is, again, the easternmost part of the subbasin that I was referring to, and the reason why we are focusing projects and management actions in this part of the subbasin. So I'll pass it over to Arden to talk about water quality.
Thank you. So water quality is one of the sustainability criteria that has pretty unique definitions for undesirable results in our GSP. And so we have a process where we identify wells each year that we want to look at a bit more closely, and then determine if their increased concentrations are related to GSA management activities. So next to the symbol in the slide, we have the definition of undesirable results in the GSP. So they occur when a subbasin potable supply well in the defined monitoring network reports either a new first-time exceedance of an MT or an increase in concentration above the MT for a Modesto subbasin constituent of concern that results in increased operational cost and is caused by GSA management activities listed. And so it's a little bit long, the definition. I'll try to walk through the process that we take each year to determine if undesirable results have occurred for water quality in each annual report. So first, we established a baseline monitoring network for water quality in the 2021 annual report. This is different than the monitoring networks that we have for water levels or interconnected surface water. These were 361 wells that were monitored in water year 2021 for any of the 7 constituents of concern. And the constituents of concern we're looking at are arsenic, nitrate, uranium, total dissolved solids, 1,2,3-TCP, PCE, and DVCP. So it's a mix of naturally occurring and man-caused contaminants. And then each year we compare the concentrations in that water year to the concentrations that we've seen in past years for the baseline wells. So on the next slide, we sort of go through the process for this year. So each year we download the data, the water quality data online from the Gamma GeoTracker database. So we did that for water year 2024. And then we compared the concentrations this past year to the concentrations from 91 to 2023 to look at if there's any new MCL exceedances or further increases in concentrations above the MCLs. And then we look more closely at the potable supply wells and examine them individually to identify if the increased concentrations could be related to GSA management. So for that, we're looking at, well, do the increases correspond to water levels dropping beneath the MTs for the water level network? do we see concentrations increasing prior to the GSP implementation? Because that indicates a pre-existing issue. If there were specific recharge projects by the GSA that were causing concentrations to increase in surrounding wells, that's something we would take note of. And in the annual report, we have 7 maps, each showing the status of wells that were monitored that year in the network for each of the 7 constituents of concern. And I'm not going to go through all of those, but those are in the annual report. And so on the next slide, this is showing the wells that were monitored in water year 2024. So this is one of the figures in the annual report, and the wells are color-coded based off of which aquifer they're in. The blue wells are ones in the Eastern Principal Aquifer, orange are Western Upper Principal Aquifer, the purple ones are the Western Lower Principal Aquifer. And then there's there's the green wells, which are wells which either didn't have construction information, so they were in the west, but we couldn't pinpoint which aquifer they were in, or they were screened in multiple intervals. And those are called the Western Principal Aquifer wells. And then in gray, this is showing the wells that were in the baseline, but they weren't monitored in water year 2024. And so in water year 2024, we had 260 of the 361 wells in the monitoring network that were monitored. And 162 of those were municipal, and 1 was a domestic well. I'll note that there were 97 monitoring wells at regulated facilities in the monitoring network, and you can kind of see these occurring as clusters in the map. And so we keep an eye on what's going on with the concentrations, but we recognize that these are near areas that have anthropogenic caused contamination issues, and that they're regulated by other agencies. So they aren't the GSA's responsibility, but we do keep an eye on them. We just don't consider them as potential wells that could be indicators of undesirable results. So the next slide is showing our summary of the wells that we looked at a bit more closely. And for none of these wells, after looking at them and comparing the concentration trends to water level trends, for none of these wells, we saw a reason to believe that the concentration increases were caused by GSA water management. So there were 10, so undesirable results did not occur in this annual report. And so there were 10 potable supply wells that we looked at more closely. And 6 of those wells either had a first time increase above the MCL or a further increase above the MCL for nitrate. There were 2 wells that we looked at more closely for uranium, and then 2 wells that we looked at more closely for 1,2,3 TCP. So the next slide is showing an example of one of the 7 maps that we include in the annual report that shows the constituent of concern sort of status for wells that were monitored in water year 2024. So this is showing nitrate, or wells that were monitored for nitrate, and each of the little maps on here are broken down for each aquifer. So in the top left, we have Western Upper and Eastern Principal Aquifers. To the right is the Western Lower Principal Aquifer. And at the bottom are those Western Principal Aquifers that we couldn't really pin down which specific aquifer these wells were screened in. And so the green dots are the wells where the nitrate concentrations were below the 10 parts per million maximum contaminant level, and that's nitrate as nitrogen. The black were the non-detects. Yellow were ones that did have concentrations above that 10 micrograms, that 10 parts per million maximum contaminant level, but we've seen concentrations higher than the water year 2024 levels in the past. And then the 2 red dots are 2 potable water supply wells that reported first time MCL exceedances. So it's their first time. having a concentration greater than 10 parts per million. And then the 4 orange dots, and some of them are hiding behind the red dots, are the wells that had concentrations that have been above the MCL in the past, but in water 2024, they had their maximum concentration observed since 1991. And so I'll just walk through real quick on the next couple of slides an example of what we look at. So there's 2 wells that are shown on this figure that they occurred really close to each other. They were near the same property, which you can see on the map to the left. And these were 2 wells where one of them, which we show in light green on the time concentration plot to the right, had a first time exceedance above the 10 parts per million MCL in water year 2024. So we see for the first time that well is above the MCL line we have on that figure. And then in dark green, we have a well that back in 2009, it was above the MCL, but in water, and then it was lower throughout the years. And then in water year 2024, once again, it snuck above that MCL, this time at a concentration that was higher than has been observed before. So these were flagged as ones we wanted to look at more closely. And so on the next slide, you can see the time concentration plot compared to the water levels at the closest representative monitoring wells for water levels. And so at the Marquis OID well, we see that concentrations have kind of lingered around the MT for the past few years and went above it in water year 2024. But we haven't really seen a decrease in this past year of water levels at this well. And then at the Crane OID well, the other closest RMW, we see that the water levels have been above the MT and have increased over water year 2024. So looking at the time concentration plot for both of these wells, we don't see that this big increase in nitrate concentration corresponds to declining water levels in this past year. And we don't see corresponding trends between the time concentration plots for nitrate and the water level hydrographs in this area. Ultimately, we did not find a reason to believe that the increase in nitrate levels is directly due to GSA water management. So there's more time concentration plots and showing those 10 wells in the appendix. But that sort of sums up our summary of how we look at water quality in the annual report.
Thanks, Arden. So we still have a few more things to show you, some more draft results that are in the annual report before we hand it off to Dominic and his team to talk about the model update. First thing I wanted to show you was this figure of reported dry wells during water year 2024. And if you're having trouble seeing any dots on this map, it's because there are no dots on this map. Thankfully, there were no reported dry wells during this water year. And this was in contrast to the previous water year where we had about 4 wells that were reported to DWR. So good news for water year 2024 that we did not have any new reports of dry wells. Subsidence. Also good news for the subbasin. There has not been any major changes in subsidence. In water year 2024 and in past years, we look at DWR's INSAR data. The vertical ground displacement data indicated ground surface rise of up to 0.05 feet or 0.6 inches. And that's sort of the gray area. So basically stable ground surface elevations. And there are some localized areas in the eastern subbasin that indicate as much as 0.05 feet or 0.6 inches of negative land displacement or slight subsidence, but which is really, again, stable. These results show that all of these results are within the 0.6 inch margin of error for the INSAR data. So we are not seeing any significant subsidence at all during this past water year. And this next map shows the subsidence that has occurred over about the last 9 years, from June 2015 to September 2024, which is the end of this water year. And again, the results show that the ground displacement is within the margin of error for the INSAR technology. There are areas in both the western subbasin, kind of the darker orange colors, and north of the reservoir, which show a cumulative vertical ground displacement between 1.2 to 0.6 inches. These areas with the highest rates in the eastern subbasin correspond with areas where we know we do have water level declines. But overall, we are not seeing significant subsidence over this period of time. So there are a couple of GPS stations in the subbasin. This is one of them in the western part of the subbasin. In water year 2024, this data shows that there's a net vertical displacement of 0.1 inches. Between October 2006 and September 2024, which is the time period shown on this chart, there's a net vertical displacement of 0.8 inches, so less than 1 inch change over time, which is very, very little. This is a chart for another GPS station. This is in the easternmost part of the subbasin. In water year 2024, it shows a net vertical displacement of 0.02 inches negative. Between September 2006 and September 2024, there's a net positive vertical displacement of 0.3 inches. So again, ground surface elevation is relatively stable during this time. So all of the data that we've looked at, the INSAR data and these monitoring stations, are telling the same story, that subsidence is not a significant issue. Progress towards sustainability. So the annual report contains a chapter which summarizes the work that the subbasin has done in the past water year to reach sustainability. There's a lot of work going on in the subbasin, as you know. Some major phase 1 projects are underway during this water year, and they include the Oakdale Irrigation District in lieu and direct recharge project, the Oakdale Irrigation District grant-funded Paul Cell lateral expansion project, Modesto Irrigation District's long-term groundwater replenishment program, the GRP, and also City of Modesto projects to increase surface water use, to recharge stormwater, and also to conserve water. We are in the process of planning for management actions to be completed as early as water year 2025. That includes development of a well mitigation plan and groundwater accounting and reporting program. And like I said earlier, we got the great news at the end of February that DWR has approved our revised GSP. So the focus now can really be on implementation and also doing the 5-year GSP update that's due in January 2027. So in DWR's determination letter that we got a couple weeks ago, where they approved the GSP, they included recommended corrective actions, which can be incorporated into the 5-year update. Again, that's due in January 2027. These corrective actions that they included are not surprising. We're not surprised by seeing them. We will be thinking these through and including more analysis and more work to address these in the 5-year update. These recommendations from DWR, there are 6 of them, and they include refining the well impact analysis that was done for the revised GSP in order to assess beneficial uses, including GDEs, groundwater dependent ecosystems. The second is to report on implementation of projects and management actions, specifically non-district east and pumping management demand reduction. The third is to discuss aquifer beneficial uses and address hydrogeologic conceptual model data gaps and uncertainties. The fourth is to revise the definition of undesirable results for water quality and specifically account for unmanaged pumping. The fifth is to estimate the location, quantity, timing of stream depletion using the guidance that DWR is working on. And also the last one is to provide more information on monitoring network, discuss adequacy in areas with poor distribution of wells. So this is just a quick summary of their corrective actions. And, we will be diving into these and doing more work for the 5-year update that will include this. So before I pass it off to Dominic and his team, just wanted to remind you about the schedule. So we provided an administrative draft to the GSA at the end of February. Comments have been provided and we're in the process of revising that report, revising the annual report. Our plan is that by the end of the day tomorrow, we'll have a revised draft for public review that will be released, and we ask for public comments by next Tuesday, the 18th, because we'll then need to revise the report again and finalize it and get it to the GSA by the 25th. Because the following day, the 26th, is the GSA meeting where the GSA is gonna approve the final report. And then following that meeting, we will be submitting it to DWR before the April 1st deadline. So that is all I have. I will pass it off to Dominic, but before I do, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or after Dominic's presentation.
Yeah, I've got a couple.
Sure.
So Liz, one of the questions we had earlier was about minimum thresholds and how we establish those. Are you able to provide any kind of clarification on that? There was the gentleman, Sean Roddy here, he was under the impression that there's a 5 foot, that they're set at 5 foot increments, or 5 foot is what we set it at between where they were and where they are now, essentially. And that was all the buffer we had. Obviously you can see from one of the slides, it varies depending on where you are in the basin. So can you go into detail on that at all or elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go back to the slide. I think it's this hydrograph slide that you were talking about, right?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. So the minimum thresholds were defined in the original GSP that was submitted in January 2022. When DWR reviewed the original GSP, they accepted our definition of minimum thresholds, and we did not need to revise them. They had asked for some more analysis related to what happens if water levels go below the MTs, but they did not ask us to revise the minimum thresholds. They said the minimum thresholds for water levels made sense. And the way those were developed, the definition of minimum thresholds, which is in the GSP, is the historical low groundwater elevation that was measured between water year 1990 and 2021, which is the GSP study period. So it was, we looked at historical hydrographs as we were developing the GSP, and whatever the historical minimum was during that time period, that's the minimum threshold. And you're right, in some parts of the subbasin, especially in the West, the sort of the margin between water levels and the minimum threshold tend to be smaller, and that's because water levels historically have been pretty stable in the West. But when you look in other parts of the subbasin, that varies because water levels have been more variable in other parts of the subbasin over time. So that's the basis for the definition of MTs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you're welcome to ask, have her elaborate on it if you want to. But so,
again, where was it? I understand what she's saying, but
can you hear
our
him?
original plan wasn't approved, and now it was approved, but we originally submitted a 5 foot threshold from that measurement from, like she said, 1990 to 2021. So, but who decided that 5 foot was okay? Why wasn't it 10 feet? Why wasn't it 15 feet? What was the reasoning behind the analysis that gave the 5 foot that measurement over that period of time?
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to in terms of the 5 feet. And my guess is that you were looking at some hydrographs in the Western subbasin where the historical fluctuation in water level was not very big. And so you were seeing that the current water level was only maybe 5 feet above the minimum threshold, meaning that you only have like a 5 foot kind of margin of error. But that was not a definition. The five feet was not a definition that was carried through throughout the subbasin. The definition was just based on whatever the minimum, the historical minimum was level. And so in other parts of the subbasin, sort of that margin of error between the water level and threshold is much bigger than 5 feet. So it really, we did not, the 5 foot was not part of the definition. It was not part of how we developed them. In some cases, I realized that there isn't a lot of margin of error, but that's just because the water levels, especially in the west, have been so stable. And you can kind of see that on this chart. The Canfield well, which is the hydrograph on the lower left, you can see how there is not a lot of room between the water level and the minimum threshold. And that, again, that's because you can see over time that water level has not changed very much. But again, it's not that 5 feet is just coincidence. It's not a number that we use to help define MTs throughout the subbasin.
We use 5 feet of interference to domestic wells as a threshold to determine if, when we do our well permit reviews, the new well will significantly impact domestic wells under the executive order. So I got some nomographs, so we can talk more about that if you want it after the meeting, if maybe for some reason that's getting kind of jumbled up in the mix.
So that was a county thing. That was not related to the GSP.
It wasn't general this, you and I were talking about, so I'm confused. I got confused about a statement that you and I talked about which are related to something else other than this.
And we use that threshold when we do our extraction permitting too. So we can talk about that more.
So again, this trend situation from eastern to western, northern to southern, it's something that we're going to have to take into consideration for localized restrictions, not specifically overall basins then. The overall basin, because that's a big conversation that we're all having about this, because why would the west side have to do anything if nothing's being affected? Which I mentioned so far long ago, which was we need to break up the basin in other sections, and it was like, oh no, we can't do that. Well, yeah, we have to do that because that analysis shows us that that's the case. So unfortunately, yes, the east side guys are going to suffer for that. But there are things that we can do to mitigate that, obviously, by surface water and some of the other things we're trying to do. But as long as that's the basis for what we're going to analyze here and modify, is that we're going to have to break down the basin when we go to these restrictive pumping, or mitigation program, pumping reductions. But I'm assuming we're going to have to work this out in a mapping system related to this specifically.
Well, these are all discussions we're going to have at the workshops, and
Right.
It's not part of the annual report, but
Right.
yeah, this is something to show you that, even when we had water levels generally come up, we've still got that trend on the east of, the one on the right side is, you can see the difference between that and what's happening on the west side and kind of in between. So, yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But those are discussions we need to have, and things we need to determine. Yeah, ultimately. Not for today, but yeah. It's
just real general. Are the consultants going to prepare a illustrated map, kind of a way people like we did before, where it shows different management areas and whether they're impacting negatively or positively? That's been very helpful in presentations to non-experts.
right. The next part of the presentation
That is
will go into the modeling, and I think some of the things that you're talking about will be portrayed in that portion of the presentation. Yeah. Yep. So we also talked about projects. One of the requests I've had was to kind of elaborate on projects, and this is probably a good time to do it. So if you don't mind going to that slide real quick, Liz. So as part of the GSP, our goal was to really focus on projects and not have to do management actions. So these are some of the major projects we have listed here. So the first one, Oakdale Irrigation District in lieu and direct recharge projects. That's our 10-year out of district program that can be extended into 20 years at the request of the landowners in the program and the ultimate approval by the board of directors in year 8 of the program. We're now in year 3 of the program. We actually went to the board here at our last meeting at OID to approve providing water to out-of-district lands this year and putting surplus water available to that program. We have nearly all of the original acreage that signed up for that program is participating, continues to participate. Under the agreement, they are required to pay for 1.5 acre-feet per acre once their turnout is in. Those turnouts, a majority of them went in last year, with the exception of about 2 of those. So we have right around 7,000 irrigated acres in the program that will pay 1.5 acre-feet per acre, and it'll be a use it or lose it type of situation. So they're motivated to take the water that way. So you're looking at about 10,500 acre-feet going to that program, and that doesn't include some of the fringe parcels that also are on top of that. So about 10,500 acre-feet were at least thinking that people are going to be taking because they're motivated because they paid for it up front. Half of that, around half that roughly, is in the Modesto Basin because that extends to the north side of the river as well. But that's how that program is moving forward. It's going pretty well. The second bullet there, Oakdale Irrigation District grant funded Paul Cell lateral expansion. So if you look at the map there, you can kind of see a blue line running from east to west, and then there's a blue line that goes down to that island on the bottom right there. That's the Paul Cell Valley. That blue line between our South Main and that valley is called the Paul Cell lateral. We're expanding that from 30 CFS up to 180 on the heading and down to Warnerville Road. It starts dropping down as you start decreasing your demand. There's 2 tunnels in that section. Those 2 tunnels were completed this winter. So they were expanded and they were reinforced shotcrete liner for longevity. So that was done. That was about $4 million of the $14.4 million grant funding that we got to get those tunnels done. The balance of that grant funding, in addition to the engineering and environmental costs, all included rather, I should say, that will go into expanding the lateral from the heading down below or south of Warnerville Road. So that project, we're getting the plans. We've got 60% plans. We're moving towards rapidly towards 75-80% plans and hoping to go out to bid here in the next several months to get construction started, hopefully before the irrigation season is done on some of the areas that could be done outside of the footprint of the canal. And then that would be wrapped up. That work would be wrapped up for that 5-mile phase of laterals prior to the start of next season. And that'll help with providing out-of-district water and that level of service out there in the Paul Cell Valley, both to in-district and out-of-district growers in that program. So good progress there. The Modesto Irrigation District long-term groundwater replenishment program. Paul, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I can speak to it briefly. So we've had 5 applications in. Those 5 have paid the $1,000 application fee. None of them, though, have progressed to a point where there's completed plans, environmentals, where it triggers anything similar to what's been triggered with yours. Also, this year, at least currently, as things are set, we aren't at the trigger point of this program for this year.
So you're not sure if the water is going to be available this year? Is that what
Well, right now it is, unless something changes or we
For this
change the
irrigation season.
allotment, because our allotment currently is at 42 inches capped. So unless we see substantive changes that would increase that, it will stay at that, which does not trigger the GRP.
Okay. And if we continue to get rains, we're going to see things improve. So there's potential, but right now we don't know that it's
correct.
Okay.
And that aligns with TID.
Okay. Thank you. And then City Modesto projects to increase surface water use to recharge storm water and to conserve water. Do you have any ability to provide any updates on those?
Yeah,
projects?
so at least the infrastructure for the phase 2 of the surface water treatment plant has been fully built. We run it occasionally just to alternate the phase 1 and the phase 2 systems because they are independent, so we don't necessarily need to be maxing out phase 1 to have to justify running phase 2, but capacity wise, we're still not quite at phase 2 capacity because of the water conservation efforts within the city. So the city is still growing, and we eventually anticipate that we will need to, account for more than the 30 MBB a day that the city currently maintains at about. But while conservation continues to improve, that kind of does scale back, and we're not necessarily having to use as much water as we initially anticipated. And that's a good thing, and we also intend to improve our water conservation efforts as well, once we eventually have the infrastructure in place to implement the smart meters that we want to pursue. Right now, what we're actually doing is we're updating our SCADA telemetry system, and we anticipate there will be shared infrastructure with that and the smart meters. So until that's fully in place, we can't necessarily also move forward on the smart meter project as well, but that will come and it'll further improve our water conservation. But the city's also seeing a lot of development right now. A lot of single family homes are being planned and so forth, and a lot of developments happening. So over time, we still definitely anticipate the need to use that capacity, and that should also help offset some of our groundwater, which, speaking of groundwater as well, that's another thing is in terms of our city standards, as development comes in, we are requiring a lot of low impact development practices. So as commercial developments come in, as residential or industrial developments come in, they are being required to keep their stormwater on site. Historically, we've always conveyed our stormwater to various natural waterways, such as irrigation canals, the creeks, and rivers. And we're trying to move away from that slowly, at least from a new standpoint. So anything that's new being built will be keeping their stormwater locally and recharge it back into the aquifer to have that benefit. And over time, we will also be looking at removing any of our existing outfalls. So again, all these natural waterways that we currently discharge to, not only do we have state mandates that we have to comply for in terms of the trash amendments to make sure that we improve our side of the bargain on the water quality side of things, but it's just a lot of water that we're letting move out of our jurisdiction that we could be benefiting from. So those are things that we're starting to plan for and looking how we can on the long term, not only require new development to keep their stormwater, and help recharge and benefit the groundwater aquifer, at least within our jurisdiction, but also see if we can retrofit any of the existing infrastructure, since we're pretty limited, at least within developed parts of the city. You can't necessarily just buy large swaths of property and implement larger basins to do that. So we're gonna have to get a little creative in how we retain our stormwater moving forward. But that's generally where we're at on those things. So slowly progressing, but still planning to execute against these down the line.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Question I have on that stormwater thing, since dry wells have been a major thing in Modesto for 50 plus years, 60 years, whatever it's been.
No, when you say dry wells, you're talking about dry wells that are
Dry wells,
not wells going dry.
that's
Dry.
correct.
Okay.
Dry well that is drainage.
Sure, everybody
wells.
understands that.
Drainage dry wells. That's how I know.
Yep.
So the drainage wells, well, we have 10,000 plus whatever it is in Modesto, right?
Correct.
So we've really, when we talk about the west side, we've been groundwater recharging forever.
Sure.
And so, but we've decided to move to basins. So now we've got the basins, but are we getting the same percolation rate and are we getting the same kind of groundwater recharge from the basin? Because I know most of the basins have pumping stations.
Correct.
So then they're putting it in the canal, now it's going down to the river, now it's not really groundwater recharging where dry wells used to. And I know there's been a stigma towards drainage dry wells in Modesto, and that is something that we're not, we don't want to do or whatever. But an analysis that our company did with an environmental company, that we overbored out a dry well in the back of a gasoline station. And what they found was any of the contaminants had only penetrated the borehole diameter not more than 3 to 3 inches, I think it was, beyond its original bore diameter. Most of the contaminants stayed within that. So can we look at dry wells being added back into, in a positive way, into our drainage system as a groundwater recharge in Modesto? And Waterford has them as well. I'm doing projects like that where they're actually mandating the dry wells or the drainage wells in the subdivisions. So I think that's a positive trend from a dilution standpoint, but it isn't really a contamination problem that we've had. Or have you done an analysis to say that no, dry wells aren't really causing contamination problems? And so we can add that back into the idea that it works for draining groundwater, or rainwater into the ground and recharging.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So dry wells, I think we colloquially call them rock wells. Specifically because we fill them with rock, but we do have a slightly updated design that we're currently still trialing, and it seems to be doing a little bit better. The reason why it's been a little stigmatized within our jurisdiction is not necessarily because of contaminants, but it's due to its ability to mitigate flood.
Flooding.
So within the city, when we implement storm drainage systems, we're trying to get that dual benefit. So groundwater recharge is one that we're trying to definitely maximize, but not at the cost of flood mitigation within the right of way and causing a lot of areas to flood. In a lot of older parts of the city, we see, especially on the west side, you pointed it out, the groundwater is actually a lot shallower, and we've actually seen that in the presentation here. So because those older designs of the dry wells are mostly filled with rock, there's really no storage built into it. And because the groundwater is also very high, you can't really vertically bore them too deep before you start having an adverse effect there from a storage standpoint. So it's something that we're evaluating, but the reason why we're necessarily looking to move away from them is because we prefer to usually go with the French drain or horizontal drains instead, because they tend to work a little better in that stance where we don't necessarily have to, drill a basin or dig out a basin, especially since we're landlocked, right? There's a lot of areas where we really just don't have lines with the basin, so we are really moving back towards localized recharge. Essentially, the concept would be to turn the whole city's footprint essentially into like an artificial basin, if you want to see it that way, by doing a lot of smaller recharge projects in the right of way. But right now, when it comes to the dry wells, we're really only doing that actually for consideration in parts like on the east side, where we actually don't see too much flooding because we have the depth. The depth of groundwater starts to be more of that 40s, 50s, 60 feet deep, where they're a little bit more feasible. And we do them in one-off situations where we don't necessarily have pipelines to go towards basins, or we just don't, there's too many conflicting utilities to do a French drain system. With that said, your second question regarding the basins, that is something that we're trying to optimize. We have some retention basins throughout the city, so those retention basins don't have any other outlets. So those will maximize the percolation a lot better than a stream collection of rock wells or dry wells or French drains. But in the detention basins is where we're really focusing on looking how we can retrofit them over time to keep our stormwater. A lot of them are pretty large and they do have pump stations, so we're trying to see what we can do first operationally. If there is room within the basin, expand them, and then over time remove upstream demand and start doing a lot of localized recharge again, more than likely using French drains or horizontal drains. But if it makes sense, we might do a variation of the dry well, as long as we can determine that we don't compromise human safety. Just to recharge. A lot of the times on the west side, those rock wells, because they pond on the street, they don't necessarily percolate and they don't infiltrate. So what happens is we end up having to open manhole lids and try to find the quickest way possible to get it off the street. So we do lose that benefit. Right? So it's really going to be a case by case basis at the end of the day. I don't know if that helps answer.
No, it does, but
I'm going to move.
maintenance is the
I don't want to move the conversation forward here, but quick finish up your
but
thought.
maintenance is the biggest problem.
Yeah,
And
that's the other thing.
you guys don't have enough vac trucks, you don't have enough manpower.
Correct.
And not that I'm trying to generate work for myself, but there's a lot of guys, there's a couple of contractors that we could section off the town, and multiple other subcontractors could be doing this type of work and maintaining these systems so that it takes the pressure off the city. Hey, it gives guys jobs, to help support local business and that kind of thing, to do exactly what you're talking about, alleviate some of these problems, whether it's reuse, cleaning, whatever. But I like that you are going to keep incorporating it the further east we move as developments, because I think that's ideal. 10 foot above the water table, that's the state from the pollution control board, so we have to stay above that. So, but I think that can really help the further east we go. I agree with that 100%. Oh, maintenance.
Yeah, we can discuss that a little bit more if you want.
Eric, I've never, well, maybe somebody answers these questions. I've never been a proponent of recharge. It just doesn't make much sense in my world that you take surface water and dump it down into the ground 150 feet for somebody else to lift out 150 feet. It is the cost of the diesel electricity to lift that water back up to the surface. It would seem it would be smartest to take that surface water and deliver it to a pump and turn the pump off, so it doesn't go down the ground with paper, come back up, and just eliminate the pumping of our underground. Now, you have on your up here, you've shown on today that if I understood you right, that most of the problems on the east side out of the districts. And it appears with your project that's up on the board right now, you have 7,000 acres that is required in the program to take a minimum of 1.5 foot. What would be the effects on our underground water if they were mandated to take all of their water under that program and eliminate, instead of 7,000 times 1.5, 10,500, they quit pumping 21,000 acre feet? What effects would that have? And that would be one of your management issues
It'd be
to improve.
Yeah, so that's one of the projects, and it kind of gets to Louis' question, and that'll be part of the next half of the presentation, I think. So maybe we'll ask that question at the end if we don't get more clarification on that.
Yeah, to his point, I was just curious, how much of the city of Modesto is on, like, what's the percentage that's being pumped versus the percentage of urban water that's being delivered and, you know, treated surface water?
If I'm not mistaken, it might be about half-ish, more or less. And that's gonna vary based on the environmental conditions. So if we're in a drought, and we're getting cut back on surface water, we'll pump more. And then on the years when it's a wet year, we'll use a little more surface water and try to do a lot more to recharge them to give the groundwater a break and give it time to recover.
Yeah, I'm excited for you. Tile trains.
Eric, I just have a quick observation question. No ID, when you have somebody who's adjacent to the canal, puts an outlet, an inlet, on the canal, how do you handle the landowner behind them if they want to get water? Is there an agreement that, okay, we're gonna provide you water, but if the next landowner wants it, it's like almost like an improvement district? How do you deal with it?
We actually leave it up to the landowners to work together on that. So we recommend that there's an easement in place, but they need the landowner that's behind the landowner adjacent to the canal needs to have their permission. So as long as they have the permission to go through, whether there's an easement or not, we just say, okay, it's go for it, you know.
Would you allow wheeling fees?
That would be amongst them
For them?
to decide. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We provide the water at the outlet, we measure it at the outlet, we build the outlet. You tell us where it's going. As long as it's in the program, tell us when it's going to who, and we're good to go.
So literally somebody could buy water from you, $200 an acre foot.
Mm-hmm.
And then the landowner behind them, they wanted an easement to use OID water. The landowner in front of them should say, sure,
Yep.
I'll provide you water, but it's at $3.50 a foot.
It could be, as long as they're in the program. They have to be in the program though. So they can't buy that water and give it to somebody else who's not in the program.
No, but they could say for a transmission fee.
They could, if they wanted to work that out amongst themselves, they could. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, any other questions before we move on to the second half of the presentation? Yes, sir.
I had a question. In regards, in this example, it had to do with land subsidence, but why are we displaying data that is less than the margin of error? Okay, we displayed a bunch of data, and then a comment was made that, hey, actually, it's all within the margin of error.
Yeah.
Well, I don't understand why we don't just say, hey, there was no land subsidence. And it's not, this is just an example. I think there's been maybe other examples where I've considered that, you know, do we really have the technology to describe what's going on, you know, with the margin of error that might really exist?
Yeah, do you want me to take this, Eric? I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the reason why we include these figures and this data in the annual report is because this is data that is provided by DWR and they want to see it. And so that's why, and it's the best data that we can get. There is a margin of error with any measurement technology. And we're just acknowledging what that margin of error is. You're right. The take home is that there is really, very little subsidence happening in this subbasin. Throughout most of the subbasin, virtually none. Yeah, this data is being gathered on a statewide basis by DWR. They want to see it on the annual reports, and we are just interpreting it and giving our sort of thoughts on what it means. But you're right, there's very little subsidence in the subbasin.
So we have to report on subsidence. DWR requires that we report on it. So, with more information, you have a less margin of error. So we could spend more money to get a lot of data, but because we don't see an issue, we're not focused on making that a priority and spending more money on it. Essentially is what's happened, but we still have to report on it.
Yeah, I mean, just a simple one line that says, there's no subsidence. Citing your data.
Yeah.
But again, I have a tough time with some of the, the groundwater modeling. And again, how big is the margin of error? Okay, and we're describing, or we're presenting this data as if it's really valid.
Yeah, and I think going into the modeling will be helpful. We're using the best tools available. Some of the things that we're doing, though, I mean, like the hydrographs, that's us going out there and taking actual measurements. That's actual data, right? So there's a bunch of different tools you have. You gotta find your way to make sure you're meeting the legislation requirements, and a number of them, right? We have to report on all 6 of those categories and make sure that we're satisfying the state. And again, we're going to use the best available data we have within reason as far as cost standpoint. But yeah, I understand where you're going from. Definitely. Okay. Any other questions?
Is there a quantity of east side over pumping of acre feet? Has it ever been quantified?
Some of the numbers that we have projected or in the modeling section, so that'd be the next half of the conversation will probably help shed some light on that.
As a YD, if they took 21,000 acre feet from YD, does that cover that?
Yes. Yeah. I think we'll hopefully get a little more feedback on that and an explanation on that and information on that in the next half. Anybody else? I don't see anybody on the phone with their hand raised. All right, we'll move on. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Arden.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing and we'll pass it off to Dominic.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just give me one quick moment and I will dive into this. All right. So again, thank you very much for joining us and having us this afternoon. Before I kind of dive into the details of the annual report and the modeling that we've done for it, I just want to kind of echo what Liz said earlier, kind of giving a nod and congratulations to having an approved plan by DWR that came in a few weeks ago, and we're really glad to see it. So it's a it's a milestone, but there's definitely plenty of work to keep moving forward. So one of those items that we're going to keep pushing forward is the annual reports. And so what I kind of have here on the bottom half of this is to kind of give you a brief outline of what's the regulatory requirement that is the impetus of us completing this effort. And so for just a little bit of background, again, the annual reports are due to DWR by April 1st of each year, and they cover the water year, in this case of 2024, so October 2023 through September of 2024. And the goal behind that is that we have to use the best available data to collect and quantify the operations and impacts to the groundwater system. So what does that actually mean when it comes to looking at the groundwater modeling, and what is it that this fraction of the effort is reporting to DWR? So what I've kind of highlighted here is really what I consider kind of the 3 main tasks of the effort. First and foremost is compiling data. This is taking a little bit of information from every source that we have available to us. So this is leveraging a lot of state, federal, and local data sets. I'll get into each of these in detail kind of throughout this presentation. We'll kind of go through each of these one by one, show you our understanding of the operations and the hydrology that the basin, both historically but with a real focus on 2024. And then we'll dive into the fun part, the modeling results, and take a look at specifically what the model tells us about our conditions over this past year, and then really highlight what it is that we have to report to DWR. And so I want to make sure that we kind of open that dialogue, and all of you are, very aware of exactly what it is that we're presenting to the state. And so, but before I dive into all the details, just kind of take one more step forward. Again, the goal for this annual report is to develop really three main things. One is to develop water budgets, both land surface, operational water budgets, as well as being able to take a quantitative assessment of the groundwater system. In addition to that, for the annual report, we have to provide a temporal and basically a spatial estimate of groundwater production, as well as an estimate for the change in storage by principal aquifer. So I'll be making sure we present that to you today. And then as far as how we are completing that, as part of this effort, our first and foremost goal is to extend the time series, a lot of the input information, again, taking all that data that we compiled that represents the conditions in this past water year, incorporate that into the model, take the additional step of validating and verifying that model or that those results are giving us what we expect. So we validate the performance of the model. So we'll take a look at how the model compares to things like known water budgets that we receive from the local agencies, as well as that measured data that we keep coming back to, which is particularly stream and groundwater level hydrographs. So we'll take a look at a couple comparative options there as well to kind of give you a rough idea of how the model is performing against our observed data. And then this last item here, I just wanted to make a note that this effort is limited to simply an extension of the data. We do go through a lot of QC and analysis associated with it, but we are not recalibrating the model. We're not changing any other kind of the foundation of the model itself. It is limited to an extension, an update of the model itself. So just kind of wanting to put that into perspective. Okay, so then now diving into all the great information that we have access to. So first and foremost, we really compile data, both a combination of publicly available data. As I said earlier, this comes from a combination of state, federal, and what we consider other resources, which are also often institutional or educational based resources. And this is where we collect things like precipitation, ET, land use information. We look at some of the riparian deliveries and a lot of stream and groundwater levels. And so all this information is available as a publicly available resources. So we're simply able to download the vast majority of this off of DWR's web page, also within grabbing some from the USGS and other sources that are available, easily accessible online. In addition to that, we also want to make sure that we, get the latest and greatest information related to our local operations, and for that we go directly to the GSA member agencies. And so we do we work with both the two agricultural irrigation districts, Modesto and Oakdale, as well as we've reached out and kind of coordinated with each of the major municipalities within the basin, Modesto, Riverbank, Oakdale, and Waterford. And so the goal of this is to kind of work with all the member agencies of this GSA to get a strong understanding and data sets to really represent our urban and agricultural operations within the basin. And so particularly from the agricultural perspective, right, we know that there's a lot of surface water operations, and so we want to make sure we accurately are able to represent that. So in order to do that, we collect direct measured information, metered data from all these agencies related to surface water deliveries, surface water diversions, deliveries to the growers, municipal deliveries from MID to the city of Modesto, as well as estimates for reservoir and conveyance seepage. With the goal of being able to kind of capture all that information, put it into the model, and build our water budgets upon that. So in addition to that, we also, when looking at some of the urban data, we'll take a look at predominantly surface and groundwater use, recycled water deliveries, as well as making sure that we capture any population growth or demand trends that the municipalities have to offer. I'll go into each of these. This is not just the only slide I've got. We'll go each of these in detail, but I really wanted to give you all a kind of just a high level picture of kind of what goes into the model, because it is a lot of data and it's a big effort to do this. All right, so then diving into the model itself. So the first and foremost is when we take a look at hydrology is going to be able to assess precipitation. And so for your reference, you kind of look here down here in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that in 2024, there's about 16.7 inches of rainfall on average throughout the basin. And this is designated as an above normal water year. So it's above, we're seeing water precipitation above normal, both for within on what we consider the lower within the subbasin or the lower watersheds, as well as the precipitation in the upper Stanislaus and Tuolumne watersheds, which really, again, being a surface water dependent subbasin, are operationally, which is really important how much surface water we have available, and precipitation is really the foundation of that. And so we're able to kind of acknowledge, and really to put this a lot in perspective, right, is understanding the foundation of the hydrology, like where do we stand, right? We expect to see dramatically different operations and impacts to the aquifer system, whether it's a critical year, below normal, above normal, or wet. And so we want to make sure that we keep that in mind as I go through these slides. One other thing I actually kind of forgot to mention as I kind of introduced this is one of the things that you're going to see as I go through this slide deck is we're actually showing you the entire historical period. That we've done for the GSP that begins in 1991. The GSP originally, before we did the revisions, and the modeling ended in 2015. And then since then, we've extended this through each of the annual report cycles. We've extended that data, and that's why you see this kind of this red line here. And again, so I want to make sure you have the understanding and you can see all the data that goes into our historical operations, that we can compare what we see in 2024 as well as what we've seen in the past. But again, this being an annual report, I'd like kind of most of your focus and attention to being to this kind of this last column here. Again, we'll see it very consistently throughout this presentation, is going to be represent 2024. And so that's really what most of what I'll be talking about today. Okay, so then, and then the other component I want to make sure we would represent here is that precipitation comes from a resource called PRISM, which provides a kind of sophisticated interpolation between a lot of different data sources to basically provide the full distribution of rainfall across the whole basin, right? Because we very consistently know that in the eastern areas, in the foothills of California, we see a lot more precipitation than we do, in the center of the Central Valley along the San Joaquin River. And so we just want to make sure that everyone here, you can see this is the resolution that we have available for the model. So the data comes in estimated on an 800-meter resolution, and so we have that. That we're making sure we capture that variability across the subbasin. Okay. So then the next major component that we have associated with the hydrology and conditions within the basin is simply to look at temperature and evapotranspiration. And so one of the things here, again, you can kind of see a continuing trend of increasing temperatures throughout kind of the recent history within the basin. Again, focusing on particularly this green bar here, you can kind of see the average compared to some more recent years. You see a little bit of a bump in temperature, and so we expect to see an increase in a lot of times in our demand. And so this data comes from the four local CIMA stations we have. We have two in the Modesto subbasin. You can kind of see the green dots here. And again, since we share a model with the Turlock subbasin, and the model is kind of being represented in both regions, we also have the two CIMA stations that are located in Denair. And so the model incorporates both the distribution of increasing temperature and evapotranspiration that is occurring throughout the region. So one of the things I want to kind of again draw your attention to is, again, we see comparatively to 2023, we see this little spike in 2020, a little bit of a jump up in 24. So again, there's really two main things when we take a look at evapotranspiration. Again, it is related to temperature, but it is not temperature is not the only factor that builds into evapotranspiration. So we see when we look at long-term trends, particularly of ET, you see a general increasing that again is correlated to temperature. But in addition to that, we also see a lot more fluctuations in ET, and that's because in addition to temperature, there's a lot of other factors that go into ET. Principally, we have in general, it's solar radiation, cloud cover, wind dynamics within the basin. And so we kind of capture all of that information to estimate the reference evapotranspiration. Okay, so then the other major component that builds into what is our, our overall demand in the basin is, obviously we have urban perspective, but then our agricultural demand, our major demand within the basin for groundwater use is what is our land use and cropping patterns. And so one of the major steps that we take is that DWR is able to provide a statewide cropping patterns that would include the Modesto subbasin. And so we download this information. They give us basically a field scale representation of the crops within the basin. The one caveat that I want to obviously add to this is that when it comes to this data set, you can kind of see here down in the bottom, you note that this does say Land IQ 2023, and that is because the DWR usually is delayed about approximately a year. And so one of the efforts that we take as part of this update is, in addition to using the latest and greatest information we have, we also acknowledge that it's a year behind. And so one of the efforts we do is we actually go back to the previous year and make sure that we update 2023 once the data is available. And so in the future, we will do that with 2024 as well. So if we want to take a look at really what does that mean on a historical or a temporal scale, one of the things we can really see with kind of this latest year we have, and so for this updated 2024 water year, we can see that in general, we see a continued increase in our agricultural operations. Overall acreage has increased, throughout the historical period, and that's something you can definitely see on the ground. But one of the things I really also make sure that we bring to your attention, and I'll get into more detail as we explain in the water budgets, is we definitely this year see a jump in idle crops, and idle in this case is represented in this kind of this grayish color here, comparatively to the previous couple of years. And so that is certainly going to affect our overall agricultural water demand, and it will affect our groundwater production as well. Okay, so now that we have a kind of a rough idea of the data that goes into assessing the water demand, then the next step is to take a look at what are our operations from a water supply perspective. And so, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this is through coordination with local agencies, principally the 2 surface water irrigation districts that we have in the basin. So we worked with them to compile a lot of information, particularly related to surface water operations, deliveries from ag and urban, as well as looking at conveyance losses related to canal seepage, reservoir seepage, and things to that effect. The one other thing I want to make sure we point out that is new to this year comparatively to previous years is and so I wanted to highlight is one of the additions we have is these OID out of district sales, and this is what we spoke to a few minutes ago earlier in the meeting, and that for the 2024 water year, you're definitely going to see some of surface water deliveries to areas that are traditionally designated as non-district east, and so we'll be able to are able to quantify and model that in this annual report. Okay, and then so again, similarly to some of the previous slides, once you kind of have an understanding of the spatial distribution of the data that we have, is to look at really what's the quantification of those volumes. And so in here, you can definitely see that particularly in 2024, we see an increase in surface water deliveries compared to some more recent years. One of the major jumps that you're gonna, or differences that you're going to see, is that it is very small relative to the total magnitude of surface water in the subbasin, but we do have some out of district sales that you can see kind of sandwiched here between some of the other OID components in the orange. Inversely to that, when it comes to Modesto ID's operations, we see very similar urban deliveries compared to previous years. There is some variance, but again, very similar. We see an increase in agricultural deliveries, and we actually see a decrease compared to 2023 when it comes to our recharge from our canal and reservoir. And that's going to be principally because the reservoir was in 2023, it being a very, very wet year, reservoir was operated at a higher level, and so had additional seepage that we have beyond. And so that's why this one is kind of an outlier in its magnitude comparatively to the years around it. Okay, so then once we have a pretty good idea of the surface water operations in the basin, we then can jump to our groundwater system. And so really what you can kind of see here, again, is a continuation of pulling a lot of data from these local member agencies and incorporating all of their wells and all their pumping by well. And so what we do is not only collect the location, but also the volume of water pumped at each of these agency wells, and that is incorporated into the model to really make sure that we can capture a good distribution of their operations. And similarly to surface water supply, we can take a look at what do the groundwater operations look like volumetrically. And so one of the main things you'll note here, again, being an above normal year when we have access to ample surface water supply, from an agricultural perspective, we see significantly reduced pumping compared to some of the drier critical years where we rely more on the groundwater system, at least from an agency perspective. And so you see that here from the ag agencies, but then when it comes to the urban agencies, you will see a more consistent use of pumping. And so we see a little bit of an increase compared to last year, but overall, fairly consistent with the past decade or so of groundwater pumping. Okay. So now that we have a kind of a brief overview of all of the input data, now we get, in my opinion, again, we get to the fun stuff. So this is looking at the model results. And so this is where we're going to dive into water budgets. So for anybody who hasn't, been with us for previous years, and some of these water budgets may be new to you, let me give a brief description of kind of what we expect to see. So as we dive into water budgets, we're going to look at what we can call a water use budget, which in this case, you'll see kind of in the negative direction is both agricultural and urban demand. And then in the positive direction, you're going to see pumping in the gray color and surface water supplies in the blue. And so we can see this from both our agricultural and urban sectors. And obviously, if I can make sure you kind of pay attention to the overall magnitudes of these two charts here, because we are a agriculturally dominated water user in the Modesto Subbasin. So one of the things we can definitely see, particularly when focusing on 2024 from an agricultural side, again, this is where I came back to, I wanted to flag some of the idle cropland that we have, and the reduction in overall agricultural area is what you're going to see is because of that, we see a slight reduction in our overall agricultural demand within the basin. And then compounding upon that, we also, being in above normal hydrologic year, we also have ample surface water supply. And so actually the combination of those two things means that we have one of the lowest groundwater use years in the historical period. And so you kind of can see that in this gray color here, you can see that it is particularly in recent years, we are much lower, estimated as much lower in pumping. And so we're much more in line with what you see here on the kind of left-hand side of the chart. When it comes to our urban operations, again, you'll see kind of due to the nature of urban operations that aren't as dependent on things like hydrology or changing land use, we have increasing population, and so we expect to see a slight increase in overall urban demand and water use. But inversely to that, we also know and acknowledge that our municipal agencies and their conservation efforts, right, that often offset the growing population and growing demand to mellow that out. And so we see kind of a very consistent urban demand over the past several years since the most recent drought. Okay, so then the next step is to start building our groundwater budget. And the first step of that is what we have kind of fondly dubbed the operational water budget. And this represents the groundwater dynamics kind of purely in the vertical flow related to our operations. And so there's three major components here. One, groundwater pumping. And again, in the negative direction, we see things that are coming out of our aquifer system. As we see groundwater pumping here in the dark gray color. And then what goes into the groundwater, into the aquifer, is represented in the positive values. And this is deep percolation and canal and reservoir recharge. Principally, I want to make sure I acknowledge that in deep percolation, this includes all percolation. This is related to percolation from precipitation. This can be percolation of groundwater, of surface water. It's the combined applied water percolation, as well as the natural percolation for precipitation, right? So there's no dividing that at this stage. What we do look at the overall dynamics due to our operations. And so again, pulling forward from the previous slide that we can see is the echoing of the groundwater supply, again, being much lower this year related to due to the hydrology, surface water supply changing in land use. We see overall lower groundwater pumping than we have in the past, as well as additional deep percolation and canal and reservoir recharge due to the availability of surface water, the hydrology precipitation that we've seen over this past year. Again, it's an above normal year, so we expect to see a little bit of additional contributions from the land surface into the aquifer system. So then over here on the right-hand side, we actually see the balance of all of those dynamics. And so effectively, kind of if we take the net value and kind of squish the chart a little bit, you can kind of see is the net, what we call the net recharge within the basin. So in the positive values, this is again, a net recharge. This is what's flowing into the groundwater system. And in the negative direction, we have what we call net extractions from the basin. And so what we can see here is that overall, the Modesto subbasin over the this year, as well as the past several years, is that we see a slight net extraction of groundwater from the aquifer system. In 2024, we see that number is approximately just under 30,000 acre feet. But again, being given the hydrology where it is, the land use where it is, that this is actually significantly lower than what we see is compared to the subbasin's 10-year average. And so there's kind of the balance of those things. Being the surface water dominated subbasin that we are, we are very sensitive to hydrology, and so that's why you see a lot of these spikes. And then we have the benefit of this being a fairly neutral year, even if we are still a slight extractor. Okay, so now that we have an idea of kind of what the basin as a whole looks like, our next step is to take a look at each of the kind of management areas within the basin. So again, we have the Modesto area, which includes MID and the city of and a couple of the cities. We're going to have the non-district west on the western side. We'll have Oakdale irrigation district, Oakdale area again, which is Oakdale ID and the city of Oakdale, and then we'll have the non-district east area. So I'll go ahead and go through that same dynamics. Their same charts and same dynamics, but for each of the management areas. And again, in the interest of time, I'm going to go through these fairly quick, but if we have any questions, I'm happy to circle back with them at the end of the presentation. So when it comes to the Modesto, specifically the Modesto area, you can see that when from an urban perspective, because we know the vast majority of urban and domestic use is within this zone, we see very consistent numbers and dynamics comparatively to the basin as a whole. And similarly, from an agricultural side, from when looking at Modesto ID's operations, we can see that in general, there's a good amount of surface water supply to meet our agricultural demand. Again, the ag demand is a little bit lower than we've seen in previous years. And so overall, we see about a 60-40 split between surface water and groundwater supply, but overall, we see a decline in groundwater pumping as well. Then when it comes to an operational budget, similar to the subbasin as a whole, there's a fairly good balance between the two, particularly in this past year. And we can see that due to the additional precipitation, hydrology, surface water supply, we can see that in general, we are fairly well balanced actually in this past year. And so what we see that, and if you take a look at the right-hand side, you can see that our net recharge is approximately 200 acre feet, or it's pretty much a wash. We're pretty much in balance at that point. And this is overall much better than we would say in the past 10 years, which is the MIDs and the city of Modesto have averaged a combined net extraction of about 50,000 acre feet. Okay. Then when it comes to the Oakdale area, again, focused on OID in the city of Oakdale, we cover, Oakdale, the city of Oakdale being a dominated groundwater use, we see a direct relationship between demand and that demand being met with groundwater pumping, and OID being a predominantly surface water dominated district. And so you can see here that about 90-ish% of the demand in Oakdale is met by surface water with some groundwater use. And then similarly, from the previous slides, we look at the operational budget, and we can see kind of what we'd expect from a surface water dominated area, and where we see still a continuation of that, a little bit of groundwater pumping, but overall we see a net contribution to the groundwater system with more deep percolation than we do have pumping, and that is reflected in the net water use chart here, where we can see that on average, there's about 20,000 acre feet of annual recharge. And again, because of the hydrology there, we're seeing a additional recharge in this above normal water year. Okay. Then moving on to the non-district west, again, comparatively to the other two areas, much smaller, which is why you see these spatially, which is why the volumetric budgets are significantly smaller than the previous. But in general, what you can kind of see here is the combination of demand being met with surface water and groundwater. And again, the non-district west is very heavily supported by riparian water users, and so there is a good amount of surface water supply on this end as well. Similarly, from the urban's perspective, no surface water supply, so that demand is met entirely by groundwater. And then from an operational perspective, very consistently over the past 30 so years that this water budget has been developed and estimated for, we see a fairly equal balance, but we do see a slight over extraction of groundwater supply, and we are a net extractor of groundwater to the tune of about 3,000 acre feet per year. Then when it comes to the non-district east area, this is where surface water supplies are significantly reduced. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this year we have incorporated a lot of the out-of-district sales by Oakdale Irrigation District, incorporated that. But one of the things you may see is that volume is certainly included here, but compared to the magnitude of the overall, meeting the overall demand of the management area, that it is predominantly or almost entirely groundwater dependent. And so because of that, we see the demand being met almost entirely by groundwater. So again, looking at the operational budget, we see the volume of groundwater. We do see some deep percolation from applied water directly from precipitation that makes its way into the soil and then into the aquifer system. But that overall, the net recharge that we see for the non-district east is about 58,000 acre feet for this past water year, which again is slightly reduced compared to the 10-year average of 65,000. Again, really focused on what the evapotranspiration rates that we saw this past year and the land use dynamics that we have. Okay, so then one of the things as I'm kind of continuing to build this is, again, one of the components to the annual report that we must report to DWR every year is a spatial distribution of groundwater pumping. And so, and the breakdown of this dynamic here, whether it's what sector, as well as whether it's agency or private pumping. So in this case, one of the major things you can kind of see here is that all agency pumping is directly reported. It's measured by each of the member agencies within the basin, and all private pumping, both from an agricultural perspective and from private domestic wells, is estimated through the combination of the data sets that I've presented prior. In general, we see about that a little 261,000 acre feet of groundwater production in the basin for this past year, and you can see approximately the spatial distribution here, with again more of the dynamics of more pumping in areas where there's less surface water supply, predominantly in the non-district east area, but we're also seeing a good amount or significant amount of groundwater pumping in throughout the MID area as well. Okay, so then diving into our overall water budget, right? So as I said, we keep building these water budgets. And so one of the things you'll see here, we still have the operational budget components and pumping, deep percolation, and recharge. But we also want to make sure that in this case, we add some of the other hydrologic dynamics and hydraulics associated with our basin. And this is where we incorporate other things like subsurface flow and stream aquifer interaction. So in this case, we can see that there's a significant contribution of water from our three streams that are surrounding the subbasin, the San Joaquin, the Stanislaus, and the Tuolumne. And we can see that overall, this year we estimate about 50,000 or 47,700 acre feet of contributions from the stream into the aquifer system, as well as some subsurface outflow, about 17,000. Again, that kind of can go to any of the adjoining subbasins. This is a net value. So there's a combination of flow to and from the Eastern San Joaquin, Delta Mendota, and the Turlock subbasin. So the net value of that is estimated at 17,000 acre feet. Overall, though, one of the main things I'm happy to report is that we are estimating an increase in storage in this past year of about 8,000 acre feet, 7,800 acre feet, and that's what you can kind of see here in this this black line here, as well as the orange components, is that we see a slight uptick in our overall groundwater storage, and that is echoed by our monitoring network when we see our groundwater levels increasing as well to approximately the same tune. And then similarly, as looking at a spatial distribution of our pumping. We are also required to submit to DWR, and one of the major components of updating the model is to provide a change in storage map to give a distribution of the change in storage across the basin and by principal aquifer. And so by sub-basin, again, we have about 8,000 acre feet of increase in storage. You can see kind of the distribution here with the blue areas being higher increase in storages, higher groundwater levels, and then this kind of oranger, darker orange or yellow color being a slight decline. And so we can see that in general, a very heavy percentage of the sub-basin, predominantly in the MID area, we see an increase in storage, as well as kind of right here is approximately where Modesto Reservoir is located. So we see the contributions from seepage from both of those areas. We see the storage overall, again, that was operationally, as well as the general hydraulics of the system, subsurface flow, stream aquifer interaction, right? Everything comes together to build us our change in storage, and this is the approximate distribution sub-basin wide. Then really quick, because I know I'm trying to be conscious of time, really quickly to kind of go through our change in, we do have to also present that by the change in storage by principal aquifer. And so you can see that dynamic here for the upper principal aquifer, again, increasing. You do see some decline along the river. That's actually principally because last year was such a wet year that we ended up having really high water levels due to the increased stream stage and the hydraulics associated with that. That actually gets dispersed over time. And so some of that water kind of moves basically away from the stream, and so you see a slight decline adjacent to the river there, and that's simply due to stream stage hydraulics and the dynamics associated with the stream system, much more so than you would operationally, right? So it's not like we're pumping a lot of water right along the river, but then overall, kind of in the center of the basin, we see in the upper aquifer we see increases in storage, which echoes what we see in the lower principal aquifer. Again, the stream, because it's because it's subcorporate, we don't have that connection between the river and the groundwater system. And so that's why you don't see a lot of that similar colors here, but in general, we see an increase in storage in the western principal aquifer. And then the eastern principal aquifer, because there's no confining unit between the two, this is kind of the exact same chart you saw clipped comparatively to the subbasin overall. Okay, so again, we're going to go through hydrographs really quick. I have a whole bunch. I encourage you to go through some of the details. I'm going to scan through these fairly quickly. But in general, this is our validation stage where we take a look at the modeled groundwater levels in the blue and the observed groundwater levels in the kind of the black dots you see here. And again, our goal here for a lot of this is really to capture a lot of the trends as a planning tool. We don't expect due to data uncertainty and understanding of the system, we don't expect a perfect one-to-one relationship representation, but we do have a pretty good calibration in the basin. And so we expect to see these kind of near capturing the trends. Principally though, looking at kind of 2024, you can see really the capture of the trends this past year, right? Because again, we're focusing on the annual report. And so one of the major things that you'll see both in this and some of the future slides, you'll see the dot, we see a little bit of a spike here kind of at the beginning of 2024, and then the decline here. And we see that both in the observed and in the simulated data. Again, kind of a similar condition as I move from west to east. I'll go through a bunch of wells. You can see where the well is located on this map and then the actual hydrograph here. Again, similarly, we can see again, being in a above normal year, we expect to see the bump in groundwater levels early in the spring, and then through, post irrigation season, when we do the fall measurements, we see a slight decline. And we see that very consistently throughout the sub-basin as a whole, predominantly in areas that are surface water dependent. We expect this growth both in the observed and in the simulated. And again, but then in some of the areas where we do not have as much surface water supply to recharge the aquifer system, we do see a continued overall decline in groundwater levels, even though there is that additional percolation of precipitation in these areas. And so that's why you'll still see a little bit of a bump here, but just not as much. And then I have a couple here that just go along the river, and it kind of they basically tell much of the same story as the previous ones, except you'll see a little bit more of an increase in overall water, and that's because of the dynamics and supporting of the river system. So thank you. I'm sure there are questions. I try to go through that both as fast, but also include everything that I could. But thank you for listening to me, and I'll field any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Tom. Questions from the member agencies first?
The blue line in the hydrographs, is that the model projections? Is that what TM 2024 is?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Anything else? Warm out. Questions from the public? Yes.
The question, Alexandra George. So the water on the west side that gets pumped back, that's reclaimed.
Sorry, I'm having a really hard time. I don't hear you out every other word if you don't mind grabbing the mic.
That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the water on the west side that gets reclaimed, because if there's too much water and a high groundwater level, you can't farm some crops.
Mhm.
And so you reclaim that water. Where does that water go to in the accounting system here? And does that water go back to MID for another use, or what happens? And I assume there's going to be more of that water reclaimed as the groundwater levels rise.
Yeah, so there's a couple different dynamics that go on. So one is that we predominantly are capture pumping associated with from a demand perspective, right? And what we need to grow our crops. So and then from a drainage perspective, there is estimates. There's a combination of what the model calls in general tile drains, but it is incorporating of both natural high groundwater levels and the capture of that, as well as some pumping, and that is distributed to the drainage networks within the districts. And there is a combination of eventually will spill to the river system if there's no use of that water in the form of a delivery.
Let me see if I can capture what I've
Okay.
your question. So
Yeah.
let me answer what I believe is the answer. So at the tail lavender system, we do have areas on the west end, that's referred to, right? Where you can have some high groundwater levels. Where you can have high groundwater levels, so we have pumps there, shallow pumps, to keep the groundwater down. That will be pumped just to keep the groundwater down into the canal system. So that is being pumped, that could be used at that time. Beyond that, there isn't a program or anything in place to recycle that water, recharge it upstream or anything like that. So I would say only in that sense is the water become system water. So if for some reason there, as Dominique had mentioned, if it has to go into the system, there isn't use, it would spill out to the end. Does that?
It does. So Modesto Irrigation District owns that water once it's being pumped out.
In the sense what I described, yes. Because it would be sold to sell.
I was wondering if we could go back to Modesto area land and water use water. Oh, perfect. So the gray tab on top, that's defined as ag pumping. So that's coming directly out of the aquifer, right? That's not mixed with surface water.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
The gray bar that's defined as ag pumping.
Yes.
That's just pumping, correct? From the aquifer. That's not pumping. That's not pumping due to surface water delivery, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, any surface water delivery in any form is calculated in the blue tab. Pumping, ag pumping is a combination of agency-based pumping, which we get from metered data from the agency, as well as the model's estimate of pumping based to meet the demand for crops.
Got it. And the same would be for urban pumping on the chart next to it to the right, correct?
So yeah, urban pumping is the combination again of agency-based pumping, again metered wells, and then what you is not separated out here is it is the combination of municipal pumping as well as estimates for private domestic pumping. And that's based on a combination of population within the basin on a census tract scale. And then that information is combined with estimates for per capita water use provided by the state and by some of the local agencies. And that information is used to estimate demand, and then private domestic pumping is will effectively meet that demand.
Got it. Do you have the averages over the period of data for the ag pumping and the urban pumping that we see?
I do, not at my fingertips at the moment, but I'm happy to get that information to you if you'd like.
Okay, well, actually, so I pulled last year's summary data, and the average data was for ag pumping, it was negative 128,000 acre feet roughly. And
Okay.
for urban, it was negative 43,000 acre feet. I just I want to bring that to everyone's attention because a lot of times I hear, you know, I'm in non-district east and I'm in Oakdale management area. And a lot of times I hear that there's only pumping going on in non-district east. But it turns out that, you know, combining those two, the Modesto management area over the period, according to last year's data, pumps around negative 180,000. So I know you don't have the data on hand, but that's what your data claims. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to put that out. Does that sound accurate with the graphs that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I remember sending that to you a little bit after our annual report last year. It's what you're describing is effectively this chart on the left-hand side here, and you can kind of see. You know, again, I don't have the exact number, but I definitely can echo that. You know, when you say approximately 180,000 over the historical period, you can kind of definitely see that here in where 200,000 is this mark or this line. You know, that it's approximately a little under that over the long-term period. And so with a little bit more of a balance in more recent years, but again, also to kind of echo a little bit of what you just said, right, is that in general, there is a net extraction from this management area.
Okay, well, hey, thank you for clarifying that. And I appreciate you adding the 10-year averages onto the net recharge because it helps us get like a better, more realistic view of what's happening in recent years opposed to the period of data average. So thank you.
Of course.
Oh, one last question actually.
Mm-hmm.
Do you account for appropriative diversions or is it just repairing?
Can you be a little more specific or what you?
Well, back on one of your first charts or first slides,
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about how you come up with this data, right? Oh, right there with the ERIMs. So
Yes.
it says repairing diversions,
Mm-hmm.
but appropriate diversions are in the basin as well. Are those accounted for in this, or is it just specifically repairing diversions?
So the appropriative diversions from the two districts, we get that data directly from the district itself. The reason why we say riparian diversions here is because riparian diverters do not, similar to, I guess, like a private groundwater pumper, they don't have to report and measure all the diversions that they have. And so what we do is we actually use ERIMs, which is a tool from the state that estimates their water right, their ability to divert, and then we combine that with their agricultural demand of those users and basically say, hey, if, for example, let's say you have the legal right to divert 10 units, but for whatever reason the model estimates that you have 9 units of demand, we will divert up to 10 in this case, but we'll stop at whatever your demand is. And so that's kind of how we incorporate an area of uncertainty within the model.
I understand that, but I guess what I'm asking is appropriate diversions that aren't held by like the districts, are those accounted for? You know, because there are users who aren't private users who have appropriate water rights.
I guess the short version of that is I'm not sure. where, I guess, what those may be, and if so, how to account for them.
Got it. You can also find them on here as well. So.
I have a question, maybe that'll answer it.
Mhm.
So in terms of the type of diversion, appropriate diversion you're talking about, somewhere in the grocery system is still diverted.
Well, I know of some appropriate diversions on the, I guess, in the Modesto area, right? And I don't know exactly how they operate. I think they still go through the irrigation systems. They show up on E-rims, but every year we look at this data, I see riparian diversions only, and I was just wondering if they labeled riparian diversions to simplify, the slide, or if they're capturing the private users' appropriate diversion as well, that also can be found on E-rims.
So I believe it would be captured because anything that's diverted is in the other data set that is directly from agencies. This E-rims is the estimated because it isn't reported anywhere. And so I would say it would be captured because I would assume it would have to be diverted. So unless there's some separate diversion system that they're going through, I would say it would be captured.
Yeah, and I believe that to be the case. And that's what I say. So that's why, unfortunately, if you have examples or if whether it's something we can sit down together and kind of look through the specifics, but speaking at at this level of general area, I'm not quite sure how to answer your question.
Okay, no problem. I'll send you some examples and we can figure it out.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. There are some other diverters, but
they're small.
I think they're small.
It's still like, in a matter of like thousands of acre feet.
Yeah. Well, we want to get as accurate as we can. So that's a good point. Thank you. Anything else? Anybody on the phone? All right. Nice job, Dominic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, this thing wrapped up here. So item number 6, next meeting. So you saw the and attached separately from the presentation is the schedule for the annual report. So that's going to be released to the public in the remainder of the GSA, the agencies here to look at. I'm hoping to get comments back within the next week, and then we come back on the 26th and with the goal of approving the annual report so we can get it filed with DWR shortly thereafter. Comments on the next meeting? Sirs, no? Yep, that's the plan. Yep.
Okay.
Yes. No, appreciate that. Members of the public, questions about the next meeting date and time or location?
Question, but are you gonna go over the next workshop later on, or is this the time to talk about that?
I'll talk about it in the committee reports. I'm gonna just generally brush on it and they can bring it up that way if you don't mind. Okay, perfect. All right. Item number 7, committee comments or reports. So I've got a couple to start off with at least. Form 700s. So you should have received an email. So you all probably are already filling out Form 700s for the GSA. You need to fill one out as well, whether you're a primary or an alternate. You should be filling one out and submitting it. One caveat for the GSAs is you have to do it electronically as well. So it's not just the normal one you're filling out and putting the GSA in there. You've got to go online and fill that out and submit it electronically.
Did they send it to us in a link?
Yes. You should have an email. Yeah, after the meeting, I'll show you what I've got. And so you can kind of make sure, check your email, might have gone in your spam, but you need to get that done by April 1st. If not, they say they're gonna fine you $10 a day. So this is the first year that law went into effect, January 1st. So. No, the electronic filing and everything for the GSA specifically. Yeah, you'd be fine before. This is specific to the GSA.
Somebody still turn on GSA because what I filled out for them was done manually and that shipped to the hard copy.
Yeah, we typically do that.
Yeah,
But-
I've always done electronically with
Yeah.
my agency and county agency and so
Yeah.
forth, so when Turlock TID came back and said, no, it has to be done this way, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So now you're saying there's a regulation that says it has to be electronically, so.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
TID still old school.
Yeah, it might be, got it going on.
Okay. I like the paper. I like the hard copy.
Eric, I sent you my alternate email, so you can send it back.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we'll get him signed up and then he'll get an email as well from them. We're doing an update, STRGBA GSA website update. Do you have any kind of update you want to provide on that, or Melissa's on the line? Maybe she can provide. She has any kind of update on that progress. If not, then we can move on. There's Melissa.
Let's do that.
I see your hand raised. Go ahead whenever you're ready, Melissa. Should be good. Can't hear you yet. Not muted. No. Wish I could call anymore. Here, better here, but I can't. So we'll have to get another get an update next time if we.
I think that's Melissa Williams.
No, I know. That's why.
Is it?
Yeah, I'm looking at her name here. I'm surprised that she's not able to speak or we can't hear her. Okay, well, we can come back next meeting. It's only a couple weeks, so we'll provide an update then on the website. But that is moving forward. Thanks for trying, Melissa. We'll get it worked out between now and then.
Oh, you know what she wants? Is that what you're?
We were going to talk about the update, website update. She was on there to help us out with that, so that's all right. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. She's awesome. Okay, so we'll provide an update next meeting on that. Other things, workshops. We held the first workshop for the well mitigation program and the management actions, the development of that, to progress towards development and then ultimately implementation by the deadline we established in our GSP by resolution. That was held the 19th of February. It was actually, the turnout was pretty good. We had to kind of it was a good icebreaker. It was a little bit of a struggle in getting people that were knowledgeable to sit through the beginning so we could educate at least a little bit the people that hadn't been there since the beginning and everything in between. So it was a little bit less organized, I guess, than I would hope, but I think the next one will be a lot more. We're going to make some changes. We learned some things. One of the things we learned is that I think we're going to be better off doing those workshops as board workshops, because I think we all need to be there and hearing what everybody's saying, what the feedback is, and being educated on exactly what the issue is, and rather than having to do it again. So I think what we really want to do is hold these as board workshops moving forward. So that's one thing we'll be doing differently. We plan to come with a more structured well mitigation plan for people to digest ahead of the meeting, and then come to the meeting and have a better, more strategic and refined and structured conversation on certain things as we move through that well mitigation plan. That's a little bit less of a lift than the management actions. We still plan on making progress on both, obviously, but I know that's the focus. That's the plan, the focus of the next meeting workshop. Hopefully sometime in April is what we're gunning for, but we haven't set a date yet, so we'll let you know as soon as we can on when that next workshop is going to be held. So with that, I'll open it up to any other comments, committee comments, reports.
Just saying, in general, I think the improvements that I'm making, okay, special emphasis on some of the structure, because I know what some individuals have struggled with is when you just throw out to give input.
Right.
There's a struggle. So if you give ideas and parameters, it gives them something to think about, digest, and come up with more substantive input. So restating what you said basically, but I wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, specific questions for specific feedback. I think that's another reason I wanted to hold them, and we talked about holding them as a board workshop, because we can kind of keep people on topic as they're talking. But without a microphone in front of me, I'd have to jump up and try to do that, and I didn't want to interrupt people. So I think I can help structure it a little better next time and help the consultant funnel into and keep focused on the questions that we actually have for them. So yeah, anything else from the member agencies yet?
Do you think that we're gonna discuss any type of like cost sharing ideas for implementation of domestic organization?
Yeah, the thought up to this point at least is that we kind of push the costs back to the second year and get the implementation or the development of everything else in place. And we can start talking about costs. And I know that for management actions, if we were going to have to go out for a Prop 218 process that year, we would have to do that. But I don't want to detract. I think the thought, at least up to this point, was we didn't want to detract from getting it developed. So, and really knowing where we need to decide whether we're going to have implementation everywhere or some things apply to only certain places. And so that'll dictate a little bit about where a Prop 218 process would need to occur if that happened. That was a thought up to this point, but we're open to suggestions on that. Yeah, Paul.
I would add to that what you just described in terms of a call to process, that helps you develop what you need for really then talking about the costs.
Right.
So I think in terms of order, getting to that point,
right,
the order you just described is.
Yep. To generate the costs, we need to be able to have those things, and we can determine how we're going to get there to meet that and fund that. All right, I'll open it up to the public for any last minute comments. Or Melissa, we'll start with you if you can try again. Okay, let's go with everybody else. Anybody else have any comments? Yeah.
So just.
Would you mind grabbing the microphone just because you're away from most of the mics here? Thank you.
Yeah, a couple comments. I mentioned it last night. Get us back people's nitrate problems, just to understand, because it's going to fall into the cost component of this. Then my kind of last question, open ended, is discussing cost sharing, but the city council with the constituents that live in your cities. Are you taking baby steps to get there? And I would, suggest that you start having those conversations. Because if it waits till the last minute, it's going to be the farm why the cities have to pay for it. So the more education your constituents get, the better off. It's good. And probably less of a headache and a fight. And the final thought is that we have management areas within the GSP for a reason. Good reporting today that really points to why we have management areas.
Yeah, and I will say that and the same goes for the irrigation districts, making sure that we're informing our board.
Hello, Eric.
for things like the GST and annual. Okay.
Hello,
With
Eric.
that,
Hello,
we
Eric.
will- Yeah.
He,
Yep.
we lost you for about maybe 4 or 5 minutes there.
Yeah, I saw that. It was general conversation. We're gonna bring back, Chris had a comment about
We can't hear you
legal
clearly now. It must be something wrong with the
representation, the
connection.
GSA, so we committed to bring that back at some point in the future, talking about that. Yeah.
We still
Uh,
can't hear you clearly, so there must be an issue with the communication.
And then, yeah, we just talked about holding the next workshop, and I think that's when you dropped off. So next workshop we're gonna schedule, we will be holding a board workshop. Okay. Well.
Hey, Liz, could you hear me when I was talking?
Yes, I could hear you.
Okay. Think they're having some issues at OID then.
Yeah, I'm having the same problem that you are trying to tell Eric about. I think I know Arden is also.
Okay. Maybe I'll just hang on here for a few minutes to see if he comes back on.
We'll do the same.
I think we're okay to hang up. I think they may have just concluded the meeting.
Okay. Thanks,
Okay.
Jack.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
you.